You've probably heard of ampicillin, right? Maybe you've even taken it yourself. It's one of the most common antibiotics on the planet. But behind that familiar name is an absolutely revolutionary story of scientific creativity, microscopic warfare, and, believe it or not, an ongoing arms race that affects every single one of us. So let's break down how this super antibiotic literally changed the world.
We're going to follow ampicillin's incredible journey. We'll start with its creation, how it was this massive upgrade. Then we'll dive into how it wages war on bacteria. We'll look at all the infections it can conquer. And then the plot twist, how bacteria learn to fight back. And finally, we'll get into the real-world risks that come with using such a powerful weapon.
Okay, so our story really kicks off with a problem. The original wonder drug, penicillin G, was incredible for its time, but it had some pretty serious drawbacks. Scientists knew they needed something better. They needed an upgrade. So, penicillin G had two huge flaws. First, it couldn't survive stomach acid. That means you couldn't take it as a simple pill. And second, it had a pretty narrow spectrum. It only worked on a small slice of bacteria. Ampicillin came along and solved both of those problems in one go. They engineered it to be acid-resistant, which was a total game-changer, meaning you could finally take it orally, and it had an extended spectrum, which basically means it could attack a much, much wider range of bacterial bad guys. So how does this souped-up antibiotic actually do its job? What's its superpower down there on the microscopic battlefield? Well, it all comes down to a really brilliant act of sabotage. Ampicillin's takedown is this beautiful four-step process. First, it hones in on these special proteins called PBPs. You can think of them as the tiny construction crew that builds the bacteria's protective cell wall. Ampicillin latches onto this crew and just stops them cold, preventing them from linking everything together. This creates these fatal weak spots all over the wall. And finally, with the wall compromised, the pressure inside the bacterium just builds and builds and builds until, pop, the whole thing literally bursts. So this brings us to a really crucial point. Ampicillin is bactericidal. That's the key term here. It doesn't just put the bacteria on pause or slow them down, which is what bacteriostatic drugs do. No, it actively kills them. It's a true assassin, not just a security guard. So with this incredibly powerful mechanism, it's no surprise that ampicillin became a go-to weapon for doctors. It was a versatile hero they could use to fight a whole host of different infections, pretty much all over the body. I mean, just look at this hit list. Ampicillin is incredibly versatile. It treats everything from common stuff like bronchitis and UTIs all the way to really life-threatening conditions. For instance, with meningitis, it does something amazing. It actually crosses this super protective blood-brain barrier to fight infections right in our central nervous system. That is a huge deal. It's also a frontline defense against systemic blood infections and even infections in the lining of the heart itself. But, and there's always a but in stories like this is where our hero's journey takes a bit of a dark turn. You see, bacteria are survivors, and when you face them with a weapon this effective, they start to evolve. They develop their own counterattacks. And this, right here, is the central conflict in the entire story of modern medicine. We invent these amazing tools, and then the very thing we're trying to wipe out learns how to defend itself. And bacteria have evolved some seriously clever defenses. The number one most common tactic is producing an enzyme called beta-lactamase. It basically acts like a tiny pair of molecular scissors that just snips ampicillin apart before it can do any damage. Others get even sneakier. They alter their own PBP proteins, changing the locks so ampicillin's key doesn't fit anymore. Some reinforce their outer walls to block entry, or they even install these little pumps to physically kick the antibiotic out as soon as it gets inside. But science had an answer for that too. To defeat the bacteria's main line of defense, ampicillin was given a sidekick, a molecule called sulbactam. Now, you can think of sulbactam as a bodyguard. It doesn't actually kill bacteria on its own. Its only job is to go in first, find that beta-lactamase enzyme, and take it out. It clears the way so our hero, ampicillin, can get in and do its wall-busting work. Of course, even with a sidekick, we're still talking about a very powerful drug that's working inside our bodies, and that means there are always going to be some risks and side effects to think about. So, the most common issues by far are gastrointestinal things like nausea or diarrhea. And that makes sense, right? The antibiotic is powerful, but it's not smart enough to tell the difference between the bad bacteria making you sick and all the good bacteria living in your gut.
Skin rashes are also pretty common, and of course, with any drug in the penicillin family, there's always a risk of a serious allergic reaction.
But check this out. Not all rashes are what they seem. There's this really fascinating specific situation, a non-allergic rash that very often appears when someone who has mono takes ampicillin. It looks just like a true allergic reaction, but it isn't one. And that's an absolutely crucial distinction for both doctors and patients to know about.
And finally, you have to remember that ampicillin doesn't work in a vacuum. It can interact with other drugs, sometimes in pretty surprising ways. For example, it might make oral contraceptives less effective, or another medication might actually boost ampicillin's power. This complex dance is exactly why it is so important to tell your doctor about absolutely everything you're taking before starting any antibiotic.
So, the story of ampicillin really is the story of a medical revolution. It gave us this powerful, versatile weapon against infection that has saved an untold number of lives. But it also kicked off this intense evolutionary arms race. Bacteria are always adapting, they're always developing new defenses, and that leaves us with a huge question for the future. As our enemies evolve, how will we?